like to really welcome you to the both Wildflowers Institute, which is this floor, and then our home, which is the second and third floor. Roger has asked me to say a few words about this work before you listen to this wonderful presentation of Lisa and Margot. We're really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for coming today. And so I thought I'd say just a bit about this space. I was born in this house, and I found that over the course of the, I won't tell you how old I am, but over the course, we began to remodel this space as a way of reflecting our thinking, as well as the kind of social and the cultural space that we wanted to create. And so several years ago, my mother passed away. I inherited a little bit of funds from her, and we decided that the way of honoring her, because she had a really very difficult life. She was born in an immigrant family, probably never went through high school, but yet every step of the way, she actually overcame all of her obstacles, succeeded, took care of her two sons, primarily as a single mom. Her husband, my dad, passed away when I was 16. So all of this happened, but yet she overcame all these issues. And it was out of this spirit of overcoming obstacles that we thought we would create a tea room in her honor. So this space actually is a space that we have tea. And it's a space that we invite members of our community, both here in Chinatown, but the larger network of communities of color that we work with, and other communities, to come and sit with us and have tea and have very honest conversations. The only rule in this particular space is that we have to be fundamentally honest to, ourselves and to our calling and to what we believe is really fundamental in terms of our social work that we're doing. And so generally this space would be just with the Chinese medicine cabinet, the guanyin, and this table. But because we wanted to honor you today, we thought of opening up this space, and we thought it was just a wonderful way to do that, was to have you come and participate in this spirit of both honoring my mother as well as listening to some incredible people doing amazing work. So now, Roger, I'd like to introduce Roger to you, and just to say that I met Roger when he was working at the Kellogg Foundation. I'm a trustee of the Kellogg Foundation. And Roger had taken on the leadership of organizing a program around, really it's more than social leadership, but it's really thinking nationally and locally about really complex problems and drawing together a group of some of the best activists and thinkers in the country to provide them a 3-year experience. And this Kellogg Fellowship Program, which is what Roger led up, was the way that Roger and I met. And then from that work that he did, the union was blessed by having Roger accept the invitation to assume the presidentship of the union. So it's with those two bits of information that I'd like to invite Roger to come and speak to us.
I've been here before, and I will tell you there are, I don't know that there are any more gracious people in San Francisco than Hanmin and Jennifer. So thank you for opening your home to and your business space to the Union Institute University. Hanmin is also on the Board of Trustees at the Union Institute and is currently serving as vice chair of our board, and he's also a graduate of the union, finishing his doctorate a good many years ago, and I won't tell you how many years ago, but a good many years ago as well. I want to welcome all of you here. The Union Institute has over 15,000 graduates around the world. And I like to comment that the sun never sets on the Union Institute, because wherever there's a union graduate, there is good work being done. And all of you have exemplified that good work through your careers and your contributions to your communities and your businesses, your homes, and your families. And so we're deeply appreciative of having you here and appreciate that support. It's my pleasure this afternoon to be very brief and to introduce Margot Fraser and Lisa Lorimer. And let me comment very briefly about Margot first. Margot is the founder of and CEO, former CEO of the Birkenstock Birkenstock company, and I mentioned to her when she came in that I bought my first pair of Birkenstocks, which I don't have on this afternoon, about 20 years ago, and I'm still wearing them. And she told me it was time for me to get a new pair, and that's probably true, Margot. But they're so comfortable, I hate to give them up. But Margot gave up the leadership of the Birkenstock company, I think around 2002, and it's one of the it's the sole importer of Birkenstock shoes in the United States, and they distribute those shoes to over 3,000 retail establishments in the country, and I've forgotten how many are private or sole proprietors, but you could probably let us know about that. In how many individual stores there are that sell only Birkenstock. She's an entrepreneur, she's a leader, and I think you're going to enjoy listening to her and talk about the work that she did with Lisa Lorimer on their book. I would also, Lisa is a graduate of the Union Institute University. She graduated actually from Vermont College prior to our buying Vermont College. She lives in Brattleboro, Vermont, and kind of commutes occasionally in snowy weather down to Florida. And she grew the Vermont Bread Company, which she headed for about 23 years, and ended up as the CEO to one of the largest organic producers of breads in the United States, and a phenomenally successful story for her entrepreneurship. She's been unbelievably generous in her support of the Union Institute and University, and as a matter of fact, Lisa was one of the first trustees that I managed to recruit when I was named president, and it was probably the wisest move that I've ever made. She served as chairperson of the Board of Trustees through some very difficult times with Union, and she's been there to help us celebrate now that we're through all of those difficult times. With that, let me introduce Lisa Lorimer and Margot Fraser, and we will have copies of their book for you at the end of this presentation. So I don't know who wants to go first. You want? Oh, okay. Good.
For coming out to talk with us about this book that we've written. You know, it's such an interesting process to write a book because we spent probably a good year, her here in San Rafael, me in a very cold house on the shoreline of Maine during the winter, writing this book together. And it's such an inwardly focused process. So pretty much we had each other and our editor, and we were really pushing ourselves to tell the truth about what it's really like to run a company, because that's really what we were trying to focus on in dealing with the tough stuff, to say, you know, this is what it's really like. And so we went through this process together, and then all of a sudden it comes through production, and now it becomes a very outward process as we travel around talking about the book. So that's been very interesting for us. And that whole idea of not getting feedback was interesting as we had the book in our hand, and I ended up having a pre-release copy that I gave to an entrepreneur. I just want to tell you the story about her. Her name is Sue Strasenberg. She's about 5'5" with red hair and sparkly blue eyes. Some people call her Sweet Sue, but that's only if you've never met her across a tennis court or competed with her in her business. She started her business with her sister about 15 years ago, and it's called Peerless Painting and Wall Covering in Portland, Maine. They started it with 2 paintbrushes and a sanding bar, and she's since built it up to be one of the largest women-owned businesses of its kind in New England. And she does a lot of commercial work. She does ski areas and schools and hospitals, hotels, office buildings. Because she was from Maine, she was picked to paint the Bush administration's inaugural ballroom, including the gold flaky stuff on the roof, which led to a really cool marketing campaign for her, which was from ballrooms to bathrooms, because they also do a lot of residential work. So as you can imagine, when I was there last winter, it was during the time when the economy came to a screeching halt. With everything that happened in the financial markets, everything sort of stopped, right? And construction stopped. And at one point, all of the bidrooms in northern New England were empty, which was unheard of. So here's this woman who had built this incredible business, had grown it every year, was paying livable wages, was doing great things in her community, donating a lot back to her community. And all of a sudden, everything that she knew how it worked didn't work that way anymore. we actually refer to this in the book as the trend is your friend until it's not. And we've all faced it. Margot talks in the book about these incredible, wonderful, comfortable shoes. And then Reagan comes into office, and it's all suddenly dressed for success, and everybody's back to wearing those pointy-toed shoes again. In the Vermont Bread Company, the trend was our friend, and then the Atkins diet hit. There was a massive low-carb diet that hit this country, and I'm in a high-carb business. And it put Ronzoni Macaroni and Wonder Bread, the largest pasta company, largest bread company in the country, into bankruptcy. So the trend is your friend until it's not. And so here's Sue, and if you've ever been there, it's the kind of space where you can't, it's like you're so agitated because nothing's working the same. You have these employees. What do? You can't even formulate in your head the question, can you help me? Because you're just like trying to figure out like, what do you do? It's a really stressful place to be in. And her sister had heard me over the last couple of years. I've traveled around a bit, talking about what has helped at the Vermont Bread Company. Margot and I have done some events together, and we try to say what are some things that have helped, and I've talked a lot about forming an advisory board. It's one of the things that I believe is a key piece of practical wisdom, and we have a whole section in this book about small businesses creating an advisory board for their company. So her sister had heard me talk about this and talked her sister into trying this. And Sue was so brave that she did it. And I remember our first meeting. She's on the board of her country club, and we had a room at her country club. And she's walking into this room during the time when she is the most vulnerable in this business because nothing's working the way it used to work before. And she came in, and I show up like I always do with a well-chewed pencil and a notepad and lots of stories and lots of questions. So I tell her stories like when Vermont Bread Company was much smaller, we had this great distributor in the Boston market. It was the first market that we served. And he grew his business every month and paid his bills on time. And he did all the billing. He did all of the selling to the supermarkets. And everything was great. We were fat and happy until we weren't. And what happened is he got involved with some shady folks. He was moving assets around. He started kiting checks, which was basically bouncing checks all over the place. And when the dust settled, he owed my little company $195,000 during a time that my company only had a $50,000 line of credit. So I tell her these kind of stories. Or I tell her, most recently, we had this cool new product line, right, at the bakery. And we get it out into the marketplace. We're selling great guns. And the sales are going like this. And the profits are going exactly at the same angle in the wrong direction. And what we realized after a bit of time is that we hadn't done our costing correctly. And the more that we sold, the more that we lost. It's just the economics of how it worked. So I tell her these kind of stories, and I start to ask, really basic questions about her company and sort of stupid questions like as you're getting to know someone's business. And I saw her relax. And we did this a little bit more with all of us around the table, and she got more relaxed. And so it was great because we got a chance to work with her over the time that Margot and I were also working on the book. So, unbeknownst to Sue, she was also working with me, which is when you are writing a book, as you know, when you go to write, sometimes nothing's there, and you don't know how to say what you want to say. And so I got really great advice, which was to write as if I was talking to Sue. And so that's what I did. When I would get stuck and I didn't know what I was going to say, I would sit at my kitchen table and say, all right, Sue's sitting right there. What do I say to her? And so basically I wrote the book to her without her knowing it. So we get these advanced copies, and I give one to Sue. And I got to know, like, what does she think about this book that I wrote to her? What does she think about it? And she's a great reader. She reads all the time. And so days go by. I'm thinking, weekend goes by, nothing, days go by, and I'm thinking, this woman hates my book. She doesn't know how to tell me this, but she hates my book. So the phone rings, and after a number of days, and it's Sue. And she said, oh, I had the worst day. I had the worst day in my company ever. I had a trifecta of a bad day today. She said, this morning, one of my employees had a heart attack. And then she said, just as I'm getting through that, right before noon, one of my large customers, the manager, calls and says, one of your employees is stealing from me, so I have to go deal with that. And then she said, at the end of the day, and I knew the day was payroll day, and she said, at the end of the day, the check that was supposed to come in from this big customer for me to meet payroll didn't come in. I'm like, oh. And then she's quiet, and she says, thank God I read that book. Because what she remembered in the course of this really difficult day was Gary Hirschberg from Stonyfield Yogurt telling the story about when his company was much smaller. He had his yogurt produced by a dairy in Western Massachusetts, and he had big customers, and everything was being made at this dairy. And the dairy got foreclosed on and closed. And so here's Gary out on a tennis court at 10 o'clock at night, sobbing, because he doesn't know how he's going to make his yogurt the next day. And so he tells the story in the book. And she says, another thing I remembered is Carol Berry, who's the co-founder of Putney Pasta, tells the story in the book, the most heartbreaking and tragic story of when an employee was killed in her plant. And, as manufacturers, that's a risk that's always there. And she just speaks so honestly about that and tells that story in the book. And she said, I really appreciate also how all of you talked about cash and about how, when you run out of cash, what that's like. And she said, Lisa, I have to tell you my favorite part of the book, though, given this day. She said, you talked about that difficult employee that you have, the one that comes in late when they shouldn't, leaves early, has a bad attitude. You just can't believe that they're coming to work at your company on your payroll acting like this, and that employee is you. She said, I remembered you telling me this. And, I think when she was talking about this and how important the book was to her, I think it's not from a place of misery loves company. Although, I guess when you're miserable, it's nice to know that you have company around that. But I think what she was more saying is that she does a lot of reading of business books. And it was very hard for her to find a reflection of herself there, because so many of our business books and so many of the ways that we as business people present ourselves is like, I'm the superhero entrepreneur, right? I leap over tall buildings and everything's great and my company's great. And she couldn't find a reflection of herself. And it's like the fairy tale. In the book we tell the story of the fairy tale that we all tell. I mean, this fairy tale, right? Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, in a tiny country kingdom called Vermont, a young girl child was born, fully formed business owner queen. She knew everything that there was to know about business from the time that she was born. Actually, it was just proven right away because her first word was debit. And her second word was credit. She started her first business when she was 4, sold that. Started another one in high school so she'd have some money for lunch money for high school. Then when she was 21 years old, she got involved with this natural bakery that became her big idea. And the entire time that she was running her company, the entire time, every second, everybody loved her. Her customers loved her so much, they said, any space that you need, we can give it to you. And they would pay their bills as soon as they were handed them. Her employees loved her. They always came to work on time. They never, ever complained. And at the end of every week, everyone just shook hands and just said, it was so great to come together and work here this week. Her distributors loved her. They never took a charge back. They always executed the sales plans flawlessly. Her suppliers told her, you can have as much as you want. I'll never short ship you. And you can take as long as you want to pay your bills. And her bank especially loved her. They actually made sure at the end of every week they would check the balance in her checkbook. And if she didn't have quite enough, they would put extra in there. And since we are talking about a values-driven business here, we talk about the people and the profits and the planets. Well, this business owner queen never, ever had a problem because every single decision that she ever made, everything was perfectly aligned. People, profit, planet, always in every decision. And most importantly, and of course, at all times, the love and passion for her business always burned within her heart. Our business owner queen was appointed by Congressman Bernie Sanders to be on the small business, the White House Project on Small Business, where she got a chance to meet President Clinton and Vice President Gore at the time. Her grandmother, of course, said, "That's very nice, dear, but when are you going to college?" And so our business owner queen, in her 30s, found the adult degree program at Vermont College, now the Union Institute and University Bachelor of Arts program, and she got her college degree. And then when she was 44 years old, she decided one day and the next day, found the perfect equity company, and every stakeholder, all the partners, all the employees, everybody made lots and lots and lots of money. And she's here in San Francisco today talking to you. So, we laugh about this, and Margot and I have been telling stories about this a lot. But the truth is, it's pretty universal. I attended this program at Harvard Business School, and it's a 3-year program, and it's called the Owner-President Management Program. And it's for owner-presidents of $10 million to $100 million companies, and students come from all over the world. And on the second day that we were in class, one of the professors stopped, and he looked up at the class, and he said, "So, are you done being intimidated by everyone else in the room?" And we all kind of laughed a little bit, and then we paused, and then we all burst into laughter, because it suddenly occurred to me that they were as intimidated by me as I was by them, that we're all making up this fairy tale together. And the other piece about that I want to say is that despite the fact that we pushed ourselves and each other to tell the truth about what it's really like, we were writing this chapter on cash, which if you talk to any entrepreneur, that's the first thing that they want to know about. Cash was like towards the end of our book, and every time we did a rewrite, it moved further and further to the front, and now it's the first chapter in the book because that's where people open to first. And so we were working on this chapter about cash, and I can be so flippant about running out of cash. I did it all the time. I never had, in the book, when I first wrote this chapter, it's like, I never met a positive number in my checkbook. That's true. We always grew so fast, there was never enough cash. I also told stories about that the last time I ran out of cash was 2 weeks before I sold the majority of my company to this big private equity firm. That's true too. But when we got our stories back from our contributors, I realized that some of our contributors had been much more honest about what it's like to run out of cash and how that impacts your values, because you go into this sort of value disconnect when you don't have enough cash. And so I had to go back, and I promise this is the only part I'm going to read from the book, but I did have to go back and rewrite this chapter. So this is my piece about cash. It's called Cash is King. About 5 years before I sold the majority of my company, I attended an executive education program at Harvard Business School. On the final day, my accounting professor told us that after all the time that we had spent in class and all the tuition that we had paid, we really needed to know only one thing. He said it was the most important piece of information that we could take with us. He held up a large paper sign written in black magic marker that said, "Cash is king." And we all laughed. A simple sign that made us laugh, and yet the idea is not so simple to deal with when you're in the midst of running a business. I believe that perhaps the most valuable business practice is owning your numbers. Nowadays, I give talks to business groups and I do one-on-one consulting about how important it is to understand your numbers. I tell business owners that they can use their numbers to inform their decisions about what's most important and what to do next. I say that with a little practice, a calculator, and someone they can sit down with who will ask questions and help them find answers. All entrepreneurs can learn their numbers. These things are all true, and they help a lot. But there were times when I knew what the numbers meant, how to interpret them, and how to impact them. And yet, despite that knowledge, I didn't have the courage to look at them. I could not stand seeing the negative balance growing in the checkbook, and I would leave my newly printed financial statements from the previous month unopened in my inbox for days. Every time I walked past the statements, my heart would beat faster and my stomach would hurt. I tried to tell myself that in order to stay in my bubble, in order to call customers and stay upbeat and remain positive for the rest of the staff, I needed to ignore my financial problems. But that was never a long-term solution. In order to move my company forward, I always had to turn around and face them. In dealing with cash, I sometimes found it difficult to match my values with my actions. when cash was tight or non-existent, it made sense for me not to take a paycheck and to put my personal expenses on credit cards whose balances just kept increasing. And we all know that's what you do when you run a company. But when I tell that side of the story, that's the hero story. I made a personal sacrifice to make it all work, and isn't that just grand? The truth is, when there wasn't enough cash, my story wasn't pretty. When cash was particularly tight, I printed checks on a Friday. I held them until the following week or the week after that. I ducked phone calls from my suppliers while I continued to place orders, and then sent out checks only to the ones who yelled the loudest and threatened to cut us off. The stress of running out of cash was compounded because our core company values, respect, tell the truth, keep your word, they were all violated as I juggled everything to keep the company running. Running a values-driven business is about trying to keep track of the multiple bottom lines and knowing that one part of the equation sometimes has to take precedence. It doesn't mean that we are perfect or even perfectly aligned with our values all the time. So that all comes with a caveat, though, because Margot and I are not saying, and we said this a lot to each other, we are not advocating putting truth serum in your morning coffee. Because there is a place as a leader where it's your responsibility to hold the vision, because that's where you're going. That's not necessarily where you are, but this is where you're going. And you need to hold that vision to attract employees and customers and investors. That's very important. So we're not saying take the truth serum and tell the truth all the time, because that's not realistic. We know that you can't tell the truth everywhere, but one of the things that we do try to do is to say it's important to find a place to tell the truth somewhere. And for us, we found that one of the places to do that is with this advisory board that we've been telling you about. And so I just want to wrap up my part of this by saying the rest of the story about Sue Strassenberg and Peerless painting and wall covering. So we worked with Sue, and at the end of last year, she closed out her year end in the worst economy that we've probably seen in a very long time, with the highest revenues and the highest profitability in the history of her company. Now, I'm not promising that you can get those kind of results all the time. The one thing that I can promise is that that relief that I told you about, you can get that in this place. So with that, I'll pass it on to my co-author.
Well, Lisa, this is quite an act to follow. Wow, where do I come in? Obviously, I can only second everything Lisa said about cash, because from the day I started the Birkenstock business, cash was a problem. But I didn't, of course, at first I didn't know it, because when I started the business, I thought businesses make money. That it takes money, I learned in the doing. And still, I'm very glad I started that way. And I did not start going to business school first, because then I would have never had the nerve to step out there and try the thing. I did what Lisa did. After I'd been in business for a few years, I went to Stanford to some summer classes for entrepreneurs. But at first I was struggling it out. I would have never, I think I mentioned that, I wouldn't have started a business that I knew, because I'm a dressmaker by profession. I would have never started anything in the dress arena, because I knew all the problems, but I didn't know a thing about shoes. What I did know is that my feet were always hurting, and on a trip to Germany, I found these sandals. They helped my feet, and there were all these millions of women in the United States. Their feet must hurt too, because it was in 1966, and shoes were very tight, and dainty feet was what every woman was after. But dainty shoes do not create dainty feet; they squish them. So I thought this would be an easy thing to sell. This is an answer, because aren't we, when you start a business, aren't you going to look for an answer? But the question hadn't been there, because women didn't know that their shoes were hurting them. So when I walked into I lived in Santa Cruz at the time, and I must say, if it hadn't been for my first husband, I also would not have tried this. But he had been an importer of things for the home, and he had sold that business by the time I married him. But you know, when you get to know somebody intimately, you think, oh well, gee, he did that, and you can do that too. So I have to tell you, just about a week ago, I was invited by the United Shoe Retailers Association to come and speak at their event. And I told them the same story that I'm going to tell them now. Living in Santa Cruz, there was one shoe store that I thought, oh, he has more comfortable shoes than anybody else in town. So I walked in from the parking lot, from the back entrance to his store. He was serving a customer coming out of the stockroom with 4 or 5 boxes under his arm, walking towards the customer, and I stopped him in midair and I said, look, I have something you should be interested in. He looked at me like that. He didn't even stop. And he said, I could never sell anything like that in my store. And out I was. Well, when I told that story last week, there was a young man there. He said, my father was a clerk at that store at the time, and he has been telling the same story from the other side. And Tom Jackson, the owner of the shoe store, about 5 years later, he became one of our very best customers. So things shift, and in marketing, they say, you know, listen to your customer. Well, not always. Sometimes you have to know more than your customer, but then you have to, how do you then finally get there? This is because I had other folks that said no, but it would take too long here. But until there was a very lucky break that somebody told me about this convention in 1967 of the health food store owners that was in San Francisco at the Hilton. And I showed there, and that's what did it. By talking to people who really have the need, because those were all individual store owners that stood on their feet all day behind the cash register, and I said, here, try it. And they bought one pair, and that's the way it slowly spread. And many times now, people ask me, well, how would you do it now? How would you start the business? And I said, hey, it's the same way. You have to, whatever service or product you have to go where the customers are. And that might nowadays be on the website. That's the new generation. I wouldn't know how to do that. I would probably go to a farmer's market instead. But it's that contact, because people don't believe anymore in advertising hype. They trust their family, their friends. They trust even just people they meet in the store somewhere. But they do not trust anymore because they have been fooled so much. And so I think that's when people ask me, what would you do different when you started your business now? I said, obviously, I would know more from my experience, but the essential thing is still the same. Contact with your customer and tell them honestly what it is. And then, of course, the product also has to perform. You know, it really has to do. And, well, you know, I'm a believer in Birkenstock. I think it did that, didn't it, Roger? Yes, yeah, right, okay. I have written this here. And the same when I remember first early years into the business, we never had money for advertising or marketing in a big way, and what we did spend didn't always work out either, because so it's the people that keep on promoting the business. I'm sure it's the same as your bread company. It made great toast, so right, that's exactly why people came back and they bought more, and they told their friends. And also, then the big hype came on getting to scale. You have to grow in order to stay alive. And I'm still asking today, is that really always the case? Or is it not better to go slowly, one step at a time? And actually during the first 15 or so years, that's what we had to do, because there wasn't any, we could only grow as much as we could afford. And it was a frugal time. And then banks didn't want to give us any money. And then came a time when the Bank of America, they started a new division for small to medium-sized businesses, and they showered us with money. And it was a mistake, because we now start, and we had been growing, and we thought there wouldn't be any end to it. And so we bought far more inventory than we needed. We thought for future growth. And then suddenly the growth wasn't there. And also the bank got bought out, as we know, by another bank. And they changed that whole setup, and suddenly our credit limit was much lower. So there was a real disconnect. But we just held our breath and struggled through it. Unfortunately, I had to let some people go, and it was very, very difficult. And in the industry, the story was, oh, Birkenstock, that's past. That isn't. So all the other companies that had copied our sandals, they sold them for $3 a pair or so, just to get rid of it. And luckily, they sold some of them to Mexico. So we didn't have to deal with all of that surplus here in the United States. But we held on to now. Yes, people might not wear them to the office anymore, but they will still wear them at home. And that proved to be the case. And we actually never lost a lot of business. We stayed stable, but we didn't grow into the plans that we had. And that was the problem at the time. But somehow, I don't know how, but somehow we managed to get through. And of course, also we were lucky that our main supplier in Germany was a family business, and he helped us also at least a little bit with our not paying the bills exactly on time. But we both sold our business about the same time.
Yeah, I think you were in 2002 and I was in 2005.
Oh, yes, you had on that much longer. And I came to that point where I didn't really know how to pass on the legacy. I think it's time to close quickly. Okay. So, because people ask me, what is Birkenstock doing now? And I had started an employee stock ownership plan already before, but in about 2002, I sold the rest of my shares to the employees. So it was 100% employee owned. Unfortunately, it didn't work out totally the way I had planned it. And in about 2007, the German manufacturer bought the company. So now it's connected with the German manufacturer, and so I know it's here to stay. But what is so nice for me is how our former employees, my former employees, there many of them are still with the company, and also the retailers, how they still respond and say how much they learned about values and about the inner workings of an organization through my time there. And I feel that was because I allowed the employees to come in and share in creating the company. I never felt that I was the one. And they share that now wherever they are, that the same ideas and principles. And that is, for me, wonderful to see that it goes on and it spreads out into the world from here. So with that, we'll be ready for questions.